Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Continuing our series on sea level rise vulnerability and adaptation across the state, today we have a presentation focusing on LA County, and Madeline Cavallari, our statewide planning manager, will start off the presentation, followed by representatives of the Nature Conservancy who are doing some really great, exciting work on sea level rise adaptation efforts down with the city of Long Beach. So take it away, Madeline.
Thanks, Jack.
Carried.
Good morning, Chair Padilla and Commissioners. So item F6 is another in a series of briefings on sea level rise adaptation planning. For today's presentation, first I'm going to provide a brief overview of sea level rise vulnerability in Ventura and LA counties, and then we're fortunate to have Alyssa Mann from the Nature Conservancy who's going to talk with us about a project they're working on in Long Beach. They're coordinating with the Aquarium of the Pacific to reach out to community members about sea level rise vulnerability and the potential need for future managed retreat. And their outreach includes some newly developed virtual reality tools, which Alyssa will show us a little of today. So as you likely recall from previous presentations, back in 2016, Commission staff developed a statewide report on sea level rise vulnerability using local assessments, statewide data sets, and Coastal Commission district staff interviews. Today's presentation uses information from that report, also data from online sea level rise viewers, as well as more recent vulnerability assessments completed by local governments and others. The presentation highlights the wide-ranging and really in-depth efforts to assess sea level rise vulnerability that are going on throughout this region. Next slide. So getting started in Ventura County, this slide shows the county under 2 meters of sea level rise with no storms using the Cosmos viewer. The northern part of the county is mostly subject to coastal erosion, and you can see significant flooding vulnerability in the Oxnard Plains area. Over 90% of Ventura County's shoreline consists of sandy beaches, which provide critical habitat and a range of ecosystem functions and recreational values. Annually, county beaches draw over 3 million visitor days per year, generating an estimated total economic value of about $156 million. But even at a low sea level rise projection of 8 inches, storm, flood, and wave impacts will threaten most of the county's beach and dune habitats as soon as 2030. This flooding will have detrimental consequences for the many species that inhabit the region, including 25 special status species like the endangered western snowy plover and the California least tern. Other important natural habitat in Ventura County includes the Ventura River Estuary, Santa Clara River Estuary, Magoo Lagoon, and the Ormond Beach Lagoon and Wetland Complex shown on this slide. This wetlands complex is the largest and possibly the most important wetlands in Southern California. In a 2015 study, sea level rise impacts to the habitat was modeled using inundation, erosion, saturation, and accretion data, and model results show how the area has the potential to provide for wetland migration as sea levels rise. The Coastal Conservancy, City of Oxnard, and the Nature Conservancy have been working to develop a restoration and access plan for the area, and a draft of the plan was released earlier this year. With approximately 26 miles of armoring, Ventura is the most armored county in California. A common and challenging development pattern in Ventura is a row of beachfront houses, all protected by a single long revetment, which will eventually cause the existing beach area seaward to be squeezed out as sea levels rise. Similarly, in many portions of the county's coastline, the highway or railroad is the first line of development and already requires shoreline protection. The Nature Conservancy's Coastal Resilience Ventura project found that within the county, approximately 16,000 people own homes and businesses that are vulnerable to flooding during a 100-year storm, coupled with 4.6 feet of sea level rise, and that replacement costs for these homes and businesses top more than $2 billion. Also at risk are more than 170 miles of roads and railroad tracks, and critical infrastructure facilities such as water treatment and power generating facilities, as well as the Naval Base Ventura County. In addition, the Coastal Resilience Ventura project also found that there are currently 5 EPA-regulated hazardous sites that are at risk from inundation by a 100-year flood. With a rise of 4.6 feet of sea level rise, that number of sites increases to 13. Next, I wanted to highlight the area in and around Oxnard, which is especially vulnerable to sea level rise. This slide shows the area using the Cosmos model with 2 meters of sea level rise and no storms. According to Oxnard's vulnerability assessment, with just 8 inches of sea level rise, there would be over $300 million of losses to residential development, mostly in the Oxnard Shores and Channel Islands harbor areas, In addition, there are power plants, as well as 415 acres of publicly accessible beach and the Halico Superfund site that all become vulnerable with just 8 inches of sea level rise. Also, groundwater, which provides the principal water supply for irrigation and urban uses over much of Ventura's Oxnard Plain, is also vulnerable. Saltwater intrusion has already started to take place in the deep aquifer system of the South Oxnard Plains and could be exacerbated by sea level rise. So agriculture in this area will suffer from saltwater intrusion and is also vulnerable to overland flooding. Moving on to Los Angeles, LA County includes over 100 miles of shoreline, the ports of LA and Long Beach. Over 10 million residents, or around 1/4 of the state's population, live in the county, with some of the most diverse populations in the state. The LA County Department of Beaches and Harbors conducted an assessment of beach vulnerability in 2016 and took a somewhat unique approach to evaluating the adaptation strategies for the county's public beaches. They determined that a sea level rise of about 1 to 1.5 feet may be a tipping point for decision-making. Prior to that time, they found that short-term management strategies like temporary winter berms may continue to be effective, but that above that sea level rise amount, storms and coastal flooding may overwhelm short-term strategies and managed retreat may be needed. For example, they contemplate the potential need to reduce parking area and rely more on public transit, and they acknowledge that their limited resources may make it impractical to maintain beach widths in certain areas, and that they may instead need to direct resources to preserve a reduced public beach system for as long as possible. There is a need throughout Los Angeles County for shoreline management planning to address residential development vulnerable to sea level rise. In the past, many jurisdictions have relied on sand replenishment projects and seasonal berms as storm defenses. For example, many beaches in the Santa Monica Bay region were historically narrow, but starting in the 1930s were artificially widened through large-scale beach nourishment projects and the construction of sand retention structures like breakwaters and groins. Understanding the viability of future reliance on seasonal berms and sand replenishment in the face of sea level rise will be pivotal for many jurisdictions, especially those in the Santa Monica Bay region. Other important developed assets that need long-term sea level rise planning in the county are energy plants, wastewater facilities, railroads, roads, and ports. The City of LA completed a sea level rise vulnerability assessment for Venice in May 2018. This map was included in their report. It shows the city with 2 meters of sea level rise. As you can see, the low-lying canal district will be subject to very significant flood hazards. These hazards will likely be exacerbated by a lack of capacity in stormwater systems, as well as elevated groundwater levels. In addition, with regard to the city's beaches, the city expects that at 2 meters of sea level rise, beachfront and coastal assets could flood annually, beaches could be greatly reduced in width, and high water levels could greatly increase potential for flooding of inland low-lying areas. The City of Long Beach completed a climate resiliency assessment in 2015. This map is from their report. It shows various sea level rise amounts together with king tides. The report states that increased storm frequency and high tides combined with El Nino conditions will have a large impact on coastal residents, development, and infrastructure along the highly developed coastline in the city. Increased flooding, erosion, and permanent inundation has been predicted for low-lying areas of Long Beach and is already happening along the peninsula and Alamitos Bay. Like in Venice, these flooding impacts are expected to be exacerbated by stormwater and groundwater issues. You can see these potential future flood areas on the map. Dark blue represents flooding with 2 feet of sea level rise and a king tide. The lighter blue represents about 3 feet of sea level rise, and teal represents 6.5 feet, or about 2 meters of sea level rise. Highly vulnerable areas like the low-lying portions of Long Beach may eventually be left with no feasible option but managed retreat. And in a minute, we'll hear from about the Nature Conservancy's efforts in reaching out to community members in this area to talk about managed retreat. But finally, I wanted to highlight the LCP grant work happening in these 2 counties. The Commission has awarded about $8.3 million in 6 rounds of grants to 40 local governments statewide to develop or update LCPs with a focus on planning for climate change and sea level rise. Recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to adaptation planning, our local governments will be the first responders in terms of dealing with the effects of sea level. LCPs are the perfect tool for local governments and the state to comprehensively plan for sea level rise, and updating them is one of the Commission's highest priorities. Our hope is that we can identify solutions through LCPs that are both consistent with the Coastal Act and address the needs of our local governments, stakeholders, and the public. In Ventura and LA counties, we currently have active grant work in Ventura County, Oxnard, Malibu, Santa Monica, City of LA, Venice segment, Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, and Avalon. So this was a brief overview of sea level rise vulnerability in these two counties. In past briefings on sea level rise adaptation, we've heard about a range of adaptation strategies as well as the need for phasing adaptation, and video clips of our past presentations are now posted up on our website. And now I'd like to welcome Alyssa Mann. Alyssa is a project director for disaster resilience at the Nature Conservancy. She's based in Los Angeles and focuses on developing and implementing nature-based strategies to ensure a more resilient California. She manages the Nature Conservancy's climate adaptation demonstration projects, including restoring and revitalizing Ormond Beach in Oxnard, which we heard about, nature-based adaptation of Highway 1 at Elkhorn Slough in Monterey County, and developing resilience strategies for the Point Mugu Naval Base and surrounding wetlands.
Welcome, Ms. Manning.
Thank you. Well, good morning, Chair Padilla, commissioners, commission staff, everyone here with us today and watching via the live stream. I'm very pleased to be here. Again, my name is Alyssa Mann. I'm a project director with the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I have been asked today to provide some insights and start a conversation with you about the role of managed retreat in adapting our communities to climate change and sea level rise. I'm not here to tell you if and how to retreat, but instead tell you about how we are having these conversations and developing a framework for creating a dialogue in communities about managed retreat, so it can be considered among the menu of options and at the appropriate time horizons to create pathways towards resilience. Here we go. In the era of climate change and increasingly frequent and destructive natural disasters, there are some areas where moving out of harm's way may be the best choice from a health, safety, economic, and environmental standpoint. This approach, called managed retreat, would not only benefit affected people by having them, helping them out of hazard zones, but also provide a societal benefit as cost to taxpayers and insurance ratepayers would be reduced. It could also provide space to create natural buffers that protect nearby communities and restore ecological function in high hazard zones. The media has certainly been talking about managed retreat for a while now, particularly as big disasters have hit different parts of this country, and as local governments have begun to get a better sense of the economic ramifications of adaptation and are beginning to have these difficult conversations with their residents. Who would have thought that Florida would be one that was out front in having these conversations about retreat? The Florida Keys have actually been in the news a lot recently, and this has focused on how local officials are approaching these adaptation questions and conversations, and some concluding that the economic picture of elevating or adapting some roads in some communities just doesn't make sense, and retreat in whatever form it takes in Florida will have to be part of their strategy going forward. So as you all are very aware, we are not without risk here in California. FEMA's been mapping floodplains since the 1970s and tracking insurance claims against the National Flood Insurance Program. This map shows FEMA's 100-year and 500-year floodplains for Southern California. It also shows repetitive loss properties. So those are insurable buildings for which two or more claims have been of more than $1,000 have been paid by the NFIP within any rolling 10-year period. The bigger the pink circle, the more claims filed against the property. While the NFIP is supposed to be covered by premiums, it is backed by taxpayer dollars, and FEMA has had to borrow money from the U.S. Treasury to cover losses, particularly following major disasters, and pays those loans with interest at the cost of the U.S. taxpayer. With these disasters, nature can have a critical role to play in keeping communities safe. TNC found that after Hurricane Sandy, coastal wetlands prevented more than $625 million in property damages, reducing damages throughout the Northeast by about 10% on average. The Nature Conservancy's Disaster Resilience Program, where I work, recognizes the critical role for nature in how we prepare and recover from disasters. Nature provides a buffer for communities, but it needs space to be able to provide that protection. So core to this work is really reimagining development in the context of growing risk. In California and lots of other places around the country, we have built and continue to build right up into and in our hazard zones. This is particularly true along our urban Southern California coastline. To protect communities and regain this critical buffer, it may mean keeping and perhaps moving things out of harm's way so we can restore nature's protection. As you saw from an earlier slide, this is a big fiscal challenge for FEMA, and that will only get worse with climate change. They are also starting to recognize that nature-based solutions must be part of their strategies for disaster risk reduction or hazard mitigation, as they call it. And that actually restoration, the work that conservation organizations and natural resource managers have been doing for years, is actually hazard mitigation. So we've brought FEMA along with us into the sea level rise space and are now a cooperating technical partner with FEMA Region 9, which is actually a first for TNC nationally, to help change how the agency evaluates and invests in nature-based projects that help reduce the risk to disasters. First is changing how they evaluate natural infrastructure projects, how they get those projects into the queue for funding, taking advantage of the fact that now FEMA will be putting 6% of all disaster funding, a really big increase, into hazard mitigation. And also getting FEMA to start thinking about managed retreat and how to help foster those conversations with communities. So this work is really focused on community-driven conversations about the role of managed retreat, trying to bring communities along in this exploration. I just want to bring this back to some concepts in emergency management to put this into context. Here's the disaster cycle. The disaster occurs there between preparedness and response. We are really focused on work on strategies that can be put into action here in hazard mitigation and recovery phases, which in some ways is sort of the furthest from the disaster itself. And when retreat may be an appropriate option to consider to enhance resilience. The difference may be whether that retreat is, quote, managed, where we might expect that the suffering of financial losses would be less because it's done more strategically and in anticipation of some of the worst impacts, versus unmanaged retreat, where retreat is not strategic and may be necessary, particularly from a human safety perspective. Certainly actions that are in the managed retreat category, they may fall under recovery, but at some point climate change may force our hand. So the Nature Conservancy in California is working on 3 projects across this cycle to better understand the role of managed retreat and adaptation. First is Long Beach, which I'll focus on mostly today, squarely in that pre-disaster category where sea level rise is projected, where it may be necessary for retreat, as you heard from Madeline, in some areas at some point in time, but the community does have some time to plan and prepare. A project looking at adaptation alternatives in Highway 1 is the second project. So looking at Highway 1 and the railway that passes through the coastal community of Moss Landing, which also happens to go through a nationally important estuary of Elkhorn Slough. These vulnerable stretches of transportation infrastructure are already experiencing some challenges during high tide, king tides and storms. Caltrans and the regional transportation agencies recognize that they must start planning now and evaluating strategies that benefit transportation, the communities, and these amazing ecological resources of Elkhorn Slough. This includes nature-based solutions and considers realignment alternatives. Again, retreat as both part of the menu that needs evaluation, both in terms of its performance and when in time it might be appropriate. So the recognition that what's needed is this pathway to resilience, where you might have some actions in the short and midterm, but you're also planning for the long game. And the third project I wanted to mention is definitely in this post-disaster recovery phase. Not a coastal community, but I think there's some important lessons that we hope to learn in this context. And that's that the Nature Conservancy and the Paradise Recreation and Park District is partnering to better understand what happened with the devastating Camp Fire and whether open space around the community would help to reduce risk. Our mutual goal is that we can create pathways for the community of Paradise to re-envision what's possible and to reduce the risk of another catastrophic fire, while also providing increased public access to the natural beauty surrounding Paradise. We also hope that it will be a model of a community-driven approach to fire risk reduction that has conservation benefits and will be appealing to other fire-prone communities throughout California. Like I said, while it's not a coastal community, I think that there could be some important lessons to be learned. Again, all of these projects are in progress, and perhaps in a year or so, we can share some lessons and some results with you. So to dig in a little bit more about our work in Long Beach, the Nature Conservancy and the Aquarium of the Pacific are working together on a project to create opportunities for a community dialogue around sea level rise and pathways to a more resilient Long Beach, both in the near term and for future generations. What I wanted to share with you are some of the high-level observations on what seems to be working and why. Again, this is a project in progress, and we hope to have more information for you in about 6 months. So first is how critical it is to have a local partner with really deep community roots that is trusted and recognized as a leader in the community. The Aquarium and its president and CEO, Dr. Jerry Schubel, have been really active in the community on these questions and have worked extensively with the city on planning and bringing the best available science and information to bear. So the Aquarium was a natural partner to help us convene community dialogues around this issue. How important it was to establish and be clear about our goals right from the beginning, and how important the narrative framing, which is essentially embracing the concept of stakeholder empathy, that we were seeking to do. What we were seeking to do first and foremost was listen and hear from the community so that we could better understand their concerns about the future of the area, their perspectives on potential scenarios to enhance resilience of the coastal area, including the possibility for managed retreat and the appropriate circumstances when that might come into play. Our first event was a seminar at the Aquarium just this past October, where we introduced this project and what we were hoping to do over the next 6 to 8 months. Dr. Gary Griggs from UC Santa Cruz provided a great presentation to introduce sea level rise and the issues and challenges around adaptation. We then had a pretty lengthy panel discussion where the community could ask questions and make comments. It was attended by over 100 community members. It was live streamed, and the recording can be viewed on the Aquarium website. Our first listening session and focus group was just last month, also at the Aquarium. To select participants for this first session, we wanted to follow best practices for community engagement. So we asked a recognized local leader, actually the editor of the Grundy Gazette from the area, to select and invite thought leaders to attend this very first focus group. 18 community members attended, primarily representing neighborhood and homeowner associations from the Long Beach communities of Belmont Shore, Naples, and the Peninsula. We knew that this would not mean that we would get a group reflective of Long Beach as a whole, or even this area specifically. As you can see from the picture, we had a pretty uniform group, but thought it was critical to start with a group identified not by the Nature Conservancy or even the Aquarium. And we know that we cannot extrapolate what we're learning from this one group, but even as we heard from the group itself, how important it will be for us to move from this initial group to ensure that we're engaging a diverse set of perspectives. And we heard multiple times in that first focus group how they really wanted to hear from young voices as well. As I mentioned, this is not a complete project. The listening sessions and learning sessions will continue through May 2020, but I at least wanted to share with you a few of the lessons we are learning. I've talked about a couple of these already. I also should mention that this graphic picture was done during our first focus group by a graphic artist to help capture the sentiments and the lessons and the themes of the night. And I thought it was a really great way for us to engage the community in a really positive way. I already talked about influential and trusted partners and how we really wanted to start with community leaders, but we really need to engage more broadly from here. The next one is really about good communicators, and facilitation is a must. We put a lot of effort in designing these events and using trained facilitators. And first and foremost, the primary goal was to hear from community members about their concerns and ideas, and you really can't get there without good facilitation. An important goal of this first focus group was to provide a safe place to have a candid conversation. So facilitators emphasized that while we had note takers that were helping capture themes, we wouldn't be attributing any of their comments to individuals. Again, the narrative framing that this really needed to be a community-driven conversations, that our goals were to listen and to bring in tools and expertise to help enrich and inform the dialogue, but not prescribe what needed to be done. In this session, we talked as much or more about the interim steps than we did about managed retreat. You can't just skip to the end. You have to talk about some of the short-term things that will happen for this community and what can be done, and then begin talking about pathways, making sure that you have pathways for potential retreat if that's what's necessary. I'll talk more about the virtual reality in a second, but again, it's about fostering a conversation, not about the technology. And we heard again and again at the focus group, understanding the economics of the situation is really critical to engage them. So I'm running out of time, but I'll briefly mention that we were bringing in a lot of perspectives and information to help inform this decision. We're partnering with our academic institutions in Los Angeles to engage students using principles of design, economics, political science, environmental studies around this problem, and providing opportunities for them to then provide what they're learning and their projects and have be able to present those to the community. Next month, a team from the Pasadena Art Center College of Design are going to present their ideas on adaptation from their 3-day intensive design storm and get feedback for the next stage of their work to refine those designs and illustrations so that we can really visualize what it could look like here. And we're doing other projects with CSU Long Beach and USC this coming spring. All right, on to the fun part. We are working with a company called Virtual Planet Technologies to develop the Long Beach Sea Level Rise Explorer to visualize sea level rise impacts and potential solutions for Long Beach to help us engage the public around these issues. The purpose of the VR is not to scare people, but to create realistic understanding of the issue and to show a menu of solutions that might be possible. While not yet complete, we've begun to show the initial version, which I actually have with me today if anyone wants to see it, in our focus groups as a way to open the discussion on sea level rise and get input from the community along the way to improve this tool. Dr. Giuliano Khalil, who is the lead on developing this project, sends his apologies that he could not be here today. He's actually presenting about this work at an international conference in Brazil, but I'll do my best to channel Giuliano. And if you have any more technical questions that I can't answer, I'd be happy to connect you with him. So sea level rise modeling has gotten quite advanced in recent years, but this is still how we view the results. While static maps can be effective for planning purposes, communication experts are looking for ways for more immersive visualization tools to communicate and engage the public around climate change challenges. While VR is certainly an evolving field and its application for community engagement around these issues is still pretty new, there is some basis for this in the scientific literature. Recent research has shown that VR increases knowledge and preparation for natural disasters when compared with traditional communication methods like videos or printed materials. Another study from 2 Dutch scientists found that people that experienced flood in more realistic simulations also showed higher intent to purchase flood insurance and to evacuate from high-risk areas. And actually, Dr. Giuliano Khalil from Virtual Planet is working on a new study using both the Santa Cruz version of this tool and potentially the Long Beach app once it's complete to replicate the Zollberg and Midden study, adding the question about intent to relocate from the coast. So that one will be really interesting. Here's a quick 1-minute video to give you a sense of the visualizations. Again, this is the area of focus, Long Beach neighborhoods, Belmont Shore, Naples, and the Long Beach Peninsula. To create this experience, Virtual Planet creates hyper-realistic 3D models using aerial views captured with drones. For the Long Beach Peninsula, they captured almost 2,000 images and created 4 different 3D models of the entire area. These models are then displayed in custom virtual rooms that maintain kind of the identity of the local community. In this case, a beach house in Long Beach. Another feature is the aerial view, which transports users into this virtual blimp looking down on the coastline. In the aerial view, you can really experience the power of VR. Even though you're sitting in a room with a headset, physiologically your body reacts as if you were flying. If you're a little afraid of heights, your heart might beat a little faster, your palms might sweat. Obviously, it's safe. That past video didn't show the flooding scenarios yet, since we just recently completed them. So I wanted to show you a couple quick clips. Oh, good, it's working. You can use the slider to simulate sea level rise, coastal storms, king tides, and coastal erosion. For Long Beach, we chose the current scenario, a 100-year storm that could happen today, about 1 foot and up to 5 feet of sea level rise. And we used the latest coastal storm modeling system from the U.S. Geological Survey. You can see the same scenarios from a closer view. Even though the slider isn't showing, you're going from 0 to 4.9 feet of sea level rise. And same here. Is that the last one? The final product will have a voiceover in both English and Spanish to take the user through the experience. We'll try to get a prominent person in Long Beach to hopefully do that for us. And it will show some of the conceptual ideas around adaptation developed from this outreach program. And this is my last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. And I can show in breaks. I can also show the visualization in Oculus goggles, which we brought.
Thank you for making that available. That's really cool. Okay. Really exciting. I do have a question from Commissioner Almanzada.
Yes, thank you so much. Big fan of your work, and that was excellent. I have a question as to whether you've reviewed commissioned sea level rise guidance for some of the nature-based solutions and other best practices that you described today for resilience.
Yes, we have, and I think the guidance is a really important tool for communities. We also published with some partners as part of the Fourth Climate Assessment, a study that looked at case studies for natural infrastructure. And I really invite you guys to take a peek at that, because it kind of takes what you guys have done and shows some of the different examples, a lot of which are here in California.
I'm thinking more maybe of an audit, I guess, with respect to the LCPs that we're reviewing and approving in terms of how we're doing with resilience, because I know we have this guidance, we have this grant program, but I'm not really clear on the extent to which we're really seeing LCPs that are embracing nature-based solutions. So I just think that would be a potentially helpful thing. I'm not asking TNC to do it, but just for us to think about as an agency. And then another thing that struck me with the Earth economic slide is I also know that the ratio of adaptation measures taken now, like every dollar now would cost, I think, 6-fold what it would if we wait. And so I'm wondering if, and I guess this is a question for Madeline, but if we do any kind of financial review with respect to the LCPs and the proposals that come forward, because that strikes me as something important for the public to know as to the economic implications of the LCPs for their communities.
Yeah, I think, the first step is to have that economic analysis in order to gain a bigger understanding. More and more, these LCP grants are including that kind of economic analysis that we would need as a foundation to better understand those issues on a more local level. But it's definitely an area that's very challenging.
And do the Earth economics sort of tools, is that available to do something like evaluate an LCP in terms of economic implications?
Well, we've done a number of economic studies in some of our different projects. And so actually the project that I mentioned at Elkhorn Slough, where we're looking at adaptation scenarios for Highway 1 and the rail that goes through Elkhorn Slough, part of that is what I think of as a really groundbreaking economic analysis that's done by a researcher named Charlie Colgan from the Middlebury Institute Center for the Blue Economy, which is really looking at how do you look at those adaptation scenarios and when are the times when we need action, because again, we're creating pathways to resilience and looking at the probabilities using the guidance from OPC and what are the different ramifications for action now versus action later. And so, again, we're going to be wrapping up that study in June, and I would be happy to share that with you all once it's complete.
That would be great. And then just because we have you here, I know that Louisiana has recently considered a far-ranging plan to seriously consider managed retreat, and I wonder if there are any lessons learned for California from that plan, or whether Nature Conservancy has assessed the possible application of those strategies for our state.
Yeah, and what I will say to you all is one of the things that we're doing internally as an organization, we're obviously in all 50 states, and I think it's up to 79 different countries. We're also trying to look internally about the lessons that we're learning across the country. Obviously, there's a lot of other states that have had more experience with managed retreat, mostly because they've had to do a number of different buyout programs. And so we're actually working on a project to look at what is managed retreat and what is the Nature Conservancy's role in that, and trying to learn from, we have a group that comes together, brings together our colleagues from New York, from Florida, from some of Texas, from some of our other big programs, so that we can start having that conversation. So I think, like you all, that are how communities are really now starting to look at this issue. Other organizations like the Nature Conservancy are doing the same, which we haven't before.
That's great. And speaking of the network, I used to serve on the Coastal Resilience Network Steering Committee, and I wondered if there was a Coastal Commission representative on that network now.
I'm not sure. I know that there are from some of the other coastal agencies, but we could make that happen.
I don't believe so.
It's actually now run by the Coastal Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy, put some funding in to give it some legs, and then the State Coastal Conservancy took it over last year, and I continue to serve on their steering committee as well, and there's a great series of webinars to make sure that we're sharing some of these lessons across the state.
I mean, I think the virtual reality work could be really helpful to us, and I know the work that you all are doing on resilience, and so I'm just interested in the ways we can sort of bring the conversations that we're having here at the Coastal Commission, which also, by the way, include constituents like realtors, and to sort of connect the dots back to all of this really cutting-edge resilience work that Nature Conservancy and Coastal Conservancy are doing. So I wonder if we could explore that just as an agency to see how to connect the dots. But.
And I know that the commission staff has given presentations to that group. I just don't know if they sit on it. But yeah, I think that would be great.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you for being here, and thank Jack for his leadership in creating these regular updates on sea level rise. We know that this is an existential threat facing our agency, and it's really inspiring to see the work that you're doing, which is so cutting edge and innovative in so many ways. I think it's excellent, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I would just say, as I approach a new role in dealing more intimately with Conservancy, perhaps it's something that we can explore is integrating a more formal integration, the rep into that body.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we would love to participate on all of these sort of efforts. We just simply do not have that capacity at this point, and that's the challenge. So that's a high priority one. I think that would be great if we were on that with that group. The other thing that I think is so important and why the Nature Conservancy and their work is so exciting is that I've been telling groups up and down the state, and just last week or so at the CSAC meeting, is that this adaptation planning has to come from the bottom up. And this idea of partnering with these trusted entities in order to build that trust relationship, and how important other groups like the Nature Conservancy is to do that really intense local planning and that public outreach engagement, because that's the way we're going to be successful. You know, many communities view us as outsiders coming in, and the perceptions we're telling them what to do. And so you got to change that narrative, and that's what's so important, and that's why this is so important. And that technology to actually realize and feel sea level rise happening on the ground in your community, that is really powerful stuff, and that's how we're going to be successful. So,
I just would add,
it's really great.
I think if there's a shift in agency that's coordinating steering committee, my thinking was that the commission might at some point consider a representative from the commission for it. So, I'm sorry, from the commission itself. All right, then we'll go to Vice Chair Brownsy, followed by Commissioner Hart.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to both you, Ms. Cavalieri and Ms. Mann. Excellent presentations. I thought Commissioner Amanzada raised, really important points, and really appreciate her comments as well. Mine, I'm just going to drill down just a teensy bit. So in that first community meeting, were you there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm just curious. So obviously people who were attending had some interest in it. What's your sense of the level of understanding from community members in these communities with respect to what sea level rise really is?
Yeah,
gonna
I
mean?
would say it does. It definitely varies from community to community. Long Beach is perhaps a little bit unique. The city has been undergoing a pretty extensive climate action and adaptation plan for the last couple years, and that's more than just sea level rise. That's looking across kind of climate-driven issues as well as efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And they've been doing, credit to them, they've been doing a ton of outreach in their community to bring experts in as well to help get the community more comfortable with some of these concepts. And so I would say in Long Beach, one of the really interesting things that I learned was, particularly the sea level rise maps are not new to them. They've seen a few different renditions from different science studies. I think what's really unique about the visualizations is that it provides a different way to experience that information. And I remember one of the comments from one individual saying that, she's seen a bunch of these different maps, but she never realized that actually the problem on the peninsula particularly, it isn't that the flooding right now is coming across the beach, but is coming from the bay. And until she saw that in the VR, that wasn't really clear. And so I would say that, and it really changes community to community. I've also worked a ton in Ventura County. I'd say that is another place where these conversations are certainly happening. But I think that push from the practitioners working on these issues and bringing that information to communities is still slow. And I think part of that, again, Director Ainsworth, to your comment on capacity, is the capacity a lot of the local governments, that they don't have necessarily as much funding as what would be needed to do the type of outreach that we're talking about. And I think how important it is for us to look at funding sources, that outreach does cost some money, and to do this really meaningful work, organizations, particularly ones, we're even seen as an outsider sometimes when we come into communities. And so getting capacity to some of the local community-based organizations is so important.
Thank you for that. I guess what I'm trying to get, and this will be my last question, is I'm just trying to get a sense of what are these members of the public? I mean, what's their expectation about where they live and what their options are? I mean, what's their expectation at this point in terms of the local government response or a state agency response? Because we see a dynamic here when we take testimony from folks. I'm just interested, kind of what's the dynamic in these community groups that you're participating in with community members?
Yeah, I mean, what's so hard about that question is that it's so different, even within the community itself. Certainly, there's from their perspective, a push to want to be involved in that conversation, but jumping to the answer again, we don't have it yet, and I don't think that we're necessarily going to have one answer for what the community expects. But I do know that they want to be part and integral to that, to the discussion about what will happen. So I know that doesn't quite answer your question.
No, it does.
Okay.
It does. Actually, thank you very much. That comports with kind of our assessment as well. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brownsie. Commissioner Hart?
First of all, I just want to thank you very much, and just because you didn't promote it, just call everyone's attention to coastalresilience.org, which I believe is that the principal website for the work that you're describing?
Yeah, a lot of the tools that we've developed, both for some of the modeling of sea level rise, for some of the economic studies. We've also done some analyses looking at social vulnerability and how vulnerable communities and disadvantaged communities might be impacted by some of these issues. So yeah, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, it's really impressive. But
Thank you.
Actually, the reason I asked to speak was just on the topic of the work that you're doing in Paradise. I come from Sonoma County, and I was the regional parks director there, and the regional parks have been the absolute refuge and the place where the fires, including the most recent Kincaid fire, that's where the firefighters have made really their stand, and that became the basis for a parks measure that we did in Sonoma County, that you need the parks as a natural response to fire. So, there was a lot of press in Paradise about people thinking, there's so much, it was because the natural areas, or they're not maintained, and blah, 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 and that's why what happened. Of course, now we know there were other responsible entities. But I'm not sure if you're working with Sonoma County, and we don't need to talk about it now because it's off topic, but I do think there's just so much opportunity there because of the way the parks really surround these areas, and just because of the repetition and impacts of fire in that community.
Yeah, I will say that project is done by my colleague, individual named Ryan Luster, and credit to the Paradise Parks District is that it was really their idea. Right after I don't know if you saw, there was a series of NPR stories about the director there who was talking about these buffers around a community, and could that provide some protection. And I think there are still a lot of questions about the science behind that. Anecdotally, we've seen a lot of examples, even on our own lands, where, we had a fire recently, the Maria fire, that hit the Santa Clara River in Ventura County, where we own about 4,000 acres, and 2 of our properties burned. And even just looking at the behavior of the fire around restored areas, around irrigated orchards, and how there might be something there. We don't know yet, because I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done, but I think it's worth exploring this idea about can nature provide benefits in a fire context as well. And I think the jury's still out there, but it's something we're really interested in better understanding.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mann. Appreciate the questions from the members. We do have some requests to address the commission from the public on this item. We can take that. Does that conclude the presentation, Madeline?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Carl Rendall, followed by Mandy Sackett. Welcome.
Welcome. Good morning, Coastal Commissioners. My name is Carl Randall. My family's lived on the beach of Malibu for 70 years. The last 60, we've made our home in the same spot. And I am here, we think about, as Lloyd mentioned, with climate change, we certainly think about fires every minute, but we also think about sea level rise and what is going to happen next. So I'm specifically here to talk to you about sand, something that's near and dear to me, and how sand impacts our lives and how it changes things. So I don't have quite the fancy VR piece, but I have a little PowerPoint presentation, show you a little bit where we are. I want to talk specifically about something that was referenced by staff with breakwaters, but I like to consider them offshore reefs that aggregate biomass. They do all sorts of things. Anybody who can go on the end of September when lobster season starts, you go down to the Santa Monica Breakwater, you can look and see what they do. All the lights are on all night long with everybody diving for lobsters there in Marina del Rey, etc. So there's a positive natural impact. But what I'm here to talk about is what they do for sand. Here's a few pictures of places that have instituted offshore reefs and how it's aggregated sand in these locations. Jefferson earlier spoke about Santa Monica Pier and the breakwater that was created there. It's a fantastic example, but they're all over the world where they've done them. They've done smaller pieces, which I'll show you here in a little bit with reef balls, but they have large reefs that impact. And the positive here, one of the things that was referenced by staff was groins. Well, we know over the years that groins steal sand from down the beach. So that's probably not the best direction to go, but we found after 80 years watching what Santa Monica Pier does, it's created sand. I like to consider it uphill towards the Bel Air Bay Club. About 3 miles it's generated sand, and downhill all the way down to Marina del Rey it's almost 7 miles, 125-yard long breakwater, which is sadly sitting in soft sand. But if we looked at these in places where there's hard bottom, in a variety of places up and down the coast, they could be very useful for this process. So what I'm really here to do is talk to you about having something that's in your arsenal along with managed retreat, along with accommodation. There are locations up and down the coast that this could be a fantastic option for you. With these reef balls, as I have up here, which can have very limited impact, to a full rock reef offshore that can have a larger impact holding sand in place. Again, this doesn't stop longshore drift, which has been a problem in Long Beach Harbor and a variety of those places where it creates stagnancy in the water and destroys sea life. These don't. They just aggregate sand over a very long period of time. So what I'm asking is for you to keep this part of your repertoire as you move forward and figure out what to do with sea level rise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mandy Sackett, followed by Jennifer Savage.
Thank you. And Jennifer Savage was ceding her time to me.
All right, great, thanks.
Thank you. I'll be as fast as possible. Okay. Hello, Commissioners. Good morning. Mandy Sackett, California Policy Coordinator with Surfrider Foundation. Thank you so much for this ongoing series of sea level rise presentations. I feel that this information is really valuable for us, and I'm sure for you all as well, and it's really great to have a closer look sort of at each region and what's going on. And major props to Nature Conservancy for their work and the really cool VR project in Long Beach. I think that's great and really helpful for the public. So as we wrap up 2019, I just want to take just a moment to reflect on sea level rise planning decisions that you've made this year in regard to shoreline preservation and coastal armoring. So we really commend the Commission for your actions this year. I believe that they've been really boldly defending the Coastal Act. The Commission's guidance on sea level rise has been great and otherwise, really served to protect our coast. Not all the decisions that you made this year were easy, but you chose to safeguard the public trust on many occasions and save our precious beaches for the public. We did disagree on a few projects. Here they are on the slide here. We wish you hadn't approved those 2 houses in the flood zone on Faria Beach and Ventura. And we know that sea level rise was not adequately addressed in the Caltrans Eureka 101 corridor project. We also do not understand your inconsistency in allowing armory of the coastal trail in the Pacific Grove LCP passed earlier this year, especially when you denied armoring of the coastal trail in other situations, including during this year. So on the list of positive outcomes, you prohibited 2 seawalls in San Diego County. You enforced a setback for development on the bluff edge in Laguna Beach. You put some really good conditions and a limited term on a seawall at San Onofre State Beach, and you also prohibited armoring of the coastal trail at Half Moon Bay and in a marine protected area in Gaviota State Beach. You also stood very strong on prohibiting beach encroachments in Newport Beach. With all that and more, we do think this was a historic year for coastal preservation, and that we think that it will be reflected in the annual ACT Coastal Vote Chart. So all that said, we still have much work to do in order to save California's coast from sea level rise. A recent report titled Preparing for Rising Seas was published by the California Legislative Analyst Office this month, and it concluded that coastal communities must increase both the extent and pace of sea level rise preparation efforts if California is to avoid the most severe, costly, and disruptive impacts in the coming decades. A main finding of the report is that local governments are way behind in acting too slowly on planning for sea level rise. The report also offers several suggestions to remedy this, including suggesting that the legislature increase funding to local and state agencies, better facilitate cross-agency efforts, and expand support for collaborative regional efforts. So we all know these actions are critical, and we appreciate seeing them analyzed and highlighted for the legislature. The report also calls out the need for pilot projects and examples of adaptation projects. We strongly agree we need more good adaptation examples to point to, especially projects that avoid hard armoring and preserve our natural coastal processes in order to prove that it works and provide multiple benefits, including habitat and flood protection. We need a clear pathway and funding for those kind of projects, especially for beaches and coasts under public management, such as state parks. State parks should be a leader in progressive sea level rise adaptation, but they need more funding and they need more encouragement to do so. We need more of these examples out there. Otherwise, how can we expect local governments to just put them in the plans? So I really hope we can find a way forward there. Surfrider does have experience and success in this area, a project spearheaded by Surfrider's Paul Jenkins in Ventura. It's one of the few and the most robust managed retreat and dune restoration projects in the state. That project has taken nearly 20 years, and they're still trying to figure out how to fully fund and permit the second phase of the project. Creating and implementing these projects needs to be quicker and easier, and I'm really hoping we can save San Onofre State Beach with a living shoreline project through state funding as a sort of another model project. As I mentioned, you permitted a seawall for the beach earlier this year for just one portion of it, and we're really hoping to avoid armoring for the rest of the beach. It could impact, one of our state's most beloved waves, and the beach and parking is in grave jeopardy. We already know just a few more storms and it could really go. So I will just add quickly in response to Commissioner Brown's questions about community sentiments. One quick anecdote. I was at a planning meeting for Capistrano Beach Park earlier, a month or so ago in Dana Point, and the beach is really eroding, but when all the options are explained to the public, including their drawbacks, we found that the number one thing they want to save is their sandy beach, and that's even including when they look at when natural adaptation costs are higher. We did sort of an informal vote, and everybody put stickers on a piece of paper what they wanted to save most. Was it the boardwalk or the sidewalk? Everybody wants the sandy beach. So just putting that out there, and those were homeowners nearby. So. And then just to wrap up, I think the report, the legislative analyst report, it concludes that there is so much at stake for our state, our local and state and national economies. Delaying sea level rise will result in higher opportunity costs. According to the National Business Council, for every $1 we spend in adaptation, we'll save about $6 in disaster relief funds. Commissioner Almanzada mentioned that earlier, and so just really want to reinforce that. We have, a lot to do right now. The report makes clear that the state is not adequately supporting local governments or the Coastal Commission in their efforts. So I just really think it would benefit us all to actively support the recommendations in that report. Just 2 seconds. We hope that it won't sit on the shelves, and that the Commission and particularly the Sea Level Rise Committee can go forward and actively support those recommendations with the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sackett. Are there any further comments or questions from the Commission regarding the report? Thank you very much.